All right, so watercolor time. So we need to apply our watercolors, and watercolor is not like any other paint, like acrylic or oil or tempera. It's activated by water, so we just need to get our brush wet. We don't need a ton of water on it. It doesn't need to be soaking, it just needs to be wet. If you think you have too much on it, just put some on your paper towel and, take some off, no big deal. Okay, so we want to try and get all of our primary colors, which are the red, yellow, and blue. And then we also want to get our secondary colors in, which are green, violet, and orange. So we want to have all 6 of those colors in here, plus we'll have the black. Black is not a color, of course, black is a shade. But so we want to get all those colors in here and try to stay true to the colors you would see on this landscape. So water, blue, you may see touches of green, the grass green, leaves green. The flowers can be whatever color you want, whether it be yellow or violet or blue, whatever it may be. The hills, we want to have touches of green at least. Could possibly go into a blue or kind of a violet light color, depends on how we're making the sun. So there's a lot to think about when we're doing this. It wouldn't hurt to even label some things, but don't get heavy in it because the pencil lines will never go away, which is why after our watercolor is done and dry, then we'll take the Sharpie to it and go around all of our pencil lines with the Sharpie. Okay, so for watercolor, you don't need, again, a whole lot of water, and then you don't actually even need much of the water, the color itself, the paint. All I'm going to do is drop a little in here, a little bit of water, and kind of lightly scoop. You don't need to dig. This is not something where you need a ton of paint. You can always go back and add more. You just need to keep working on it. Once you stop, you can end up having an issue. So you don't really want to stop painting until you're satisfied with what you have. There's the technique I'm going to use a lot in this one, which is wet on wet. So I'm going to put down wet paint, or put down water first and then paint and then another color, because I want some of these colors to mix and blend as well as, just for the effect, but also I need to mix on my paper. I don't want to be mixing in my palette. I want to create that green with the blue and yellow on my paper, okay? So I'm going to begin. I'm going to put down a yellow coat in my sun. But I need to work fast because I don't want it to dry, because I want to get some red in on it too, so I can get kind of that orangish color. And if it seems like it's a little too concentrated and it's too heavy in color and not enough water, then go back and grab a little water real quick. And then I'm gonna grab some of that red. And make a little bit of that orange, right? And you can't mix forever when it's wet. If there's another color you're trying to achieve, then you need to wait for it to dry and then go over it. As you can see, I'm working kind of fast here, and I'm really just trying to get down some colors so that way when I'm ready to blend, I can just keep going with it. I don't really need to stay in the lines necessarily up here because these are all raised and they're going to be separated by the black lines. So I'm really just trying to get some paint down. That black's really going to help. Try and keep your strokes going in the same direction though, in case one of your strokes or a couple of your strokes becomes visible. We don't want you to have a vertical stripe where there's supposed to be something horizontal. I'm going to try to avoid my mountains the best I can. Tie into that yellow. I want that yellow on the outside real strong. All right, I want this to be darker here with the red, but I need it to dry first. I want a little bit in here. I can probably go back in here now with the red and touch this up. Get this a little darker on the bottom edge. Again, I want this to be darker, but now it's wet, so I can't go back right now. So I'm gonna let that dry and I'm gonna move on. And I'm gonna work this way, so I'm gonna work on my, you have to make sure that if this is wet on the edge, that you don't paint on the edge right away. So what I might end up doing is coming towards the flowers, and I'm gonna bounce back and forth so that way I don't keep blending all my colors together, because you don't want too much wet on wet if you can help it. So I'm gonna put in some colors here. And remember, we're going to use a black marker. So if there's any lines, any mistakes you want to cover up, you know, it'll work out. We can maybe make the lines thicker with the Sharpie, whatever we've got to do. I think it'll be okay. This is where it can get confusing just because you're covering up the lines. So some of the lines are the darker colors are gonna cover up some of the lines. So getting back in at the end, if we can't see the lines, we're just going to have to make sure that we remembered where the lines were roughly, or at least the pattern that we used. if you can avoid touching the lines, because you're gonna end up, see what happened right there? Barely touched it. Now I gotta wait for this to dry, for this to go away. What I'm gonna try and do is clean my brush off and try to pick this up with just a semi-dry, semi-wet brush, so I don't smear it around too much, and then when it's dry I can go back in with the yellow like I wanted to. So sometimes things happen, accidents happen. I should probably be using a smaller brush now for the smaller details, which I think I'm going to grab. I probably should have had a smaller brush to begin with. Like I said, this is an 8. I'll probably drop down to a 2, maybe a 4, I'll see, and then go from there. All right, so I've got a 2, size 2 brush now, but the bad part about working with a smaller brush is you've got to work faster, because you're not going to hold as much water, you're not going to hold as much paint, so you're going to have to work a little bit faster. Since this is still kind of wet and this is pretty dry up here, I'm going to start back up at the hills and go from there. And remember, don't worry about too much overflow on your lines here, because we're going to go over it with Sharpie. Okay, there's going to be some pretty bold Sharpie. There can be thin Sharpie, but there's going to be some pretty bold Sharpie too. And I don't want you getting too worried about going outside the lines. I don't want you to go outside the lines too much, because you don't want to make too much black. We want the colors to speak for themselves as well. Okay, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to make my hills. So I'm going to lay down bunch of yellow here. A bunch of yellow here. Remember, these don't have to be perfect down in these little details, the little cityscape or tree line or whatever it is that I made. You just need a general idea, because there's going to be black in there. And if the tree line is not too big, we can probably do it all in Sharpie. Otherwise, if it's kind of big, we could use the black watercolor, but we got to be really careful with that. All right, so what I'm going to do now is, the top is dry, bottom is dry. I'm going to start in on the water. I'm going to work my way from left to right. And I got a smaller brush now. I've got a number 2 brush to get into the smaller areas. Make sure it's clean, it's moist, ready to go. Remember, watercolor is activated by water. Sometimes we need more, sometimes we need less. If we're using less water, we're getting a more concentrated color. If we're using more water, we're getting a more diluted color, a washed out color. So I'm going to start in on this. I'm going to see which way it goes and hope for the best. Remember, you don't need a ton of water. You just need some water to get in there and activate the watercolor. And these lines here that are going across, I might actually make those lines darker, but right now I'm just going to kind of give it a base coat through, and then I'll go through and maybe solidify some of those lines with a more concentrated blue. Careful you're not dragging into you're dragging into your other colors, so that way you're not mixing those colors. We want to try and keep them close, but not too close. A lot of times this is why it's good to do a background color first. So, you know, doing this, learning from my mistakes, I probably should have done the, since I have overlapping, I probably should have done the water first and then let that dry and then go through and do everything on top, like the grass and the flowers. Best thing you can do in art is make sure that you can learn from your mistakes. Okay, learning from your mistakes is key. Now, I just made a mistake and realized it. This is supposed to be my tree line all the way across, so this little thin line right here should be my tree line, and I just put blue in there. But that's not a big mistake, because what's going to happen is I'm going to go over it with Sharpie anyways, so it's not a big deal. I'm not concerned about it. It's not a big deal to have the gaps, because we're going to fill it in with a lot of them. Most of them will be filled in with the Sharpie. I'm going to do some wet on wet exploration here as well. I want you to try the same to kind of get that varied effect, kind of like what we just got here. So I'm going to just lay some water down, and then you can't really see what I'm doing right now, but just know that I'm putting water down in and around my leaves with no paint, just water. And then what I'm going to do is grab a little bit of color and introduce the color to the water that's sitting there. You don't want to do the whole thing, because it'll start to dry before you get the effect. I'm going to introduce some of the color to the water, and you can see what happens. We get kind of those little explosions of color depending on how concentrated our blue is. See, and there's no water right there, so I need to hurry and blend that in, drag that out. So I missed the water there. So we can keep the little explosions, or we can just use them as paint to spread around. Up to you, depending on what kind of an effect you're going for. If you notice, I'm always going back and getting water first. Sometimes that's necessary, sometimes it's not. Can't say I'm always going back. For the most part, I'm going back, grabbing water, and then I'm grabbing paint. If we just keep going back and grabbing paint, it's going to be really concentrated, unless that's the look you're going for. But for this project, I don't think we need to. I think we need to keep it nice and light. I just noticed that I'm very light over here. I need to add some more color in this area. Now on my waves, I want to have a variation of colors. So in between the lines that I've got, I want to have something in the waves. I want to have like a light and a dark and a mid-tone, so that way we have a variation of colors. And again, I'm painting right over my pencil lines. Just trying to, because I can still see them because it's light enough. I'm going to go back through a lot of these lines and use Sharpie anyway, so again, I'm not concerned about that. What I also notice right now while I'm in this area is I don't like how dark this flower is. Even though I'm going to go through with a Sharpie and make some lines, I'm not a big fan of the color, so I'm going to see about possibly changing that. And again, I'm barely touching my watercolor. I'm not digging it into the watercolor paint itself. I'm just touching it just to get my brush saturated a little bit, and that's it. I'm moving on. So don't dig into your paint. Always make sure your brush is clean before you stop. What I'm going to do is reevaluate what I've got going on real quick. I'm going to make sure that I'm going in the right direction that I want for the flower, and then get prepared for my waves here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little more concentrated on my colors, and I'm going to kind of follow my pencil lines I've got and put in some different colored waves. Okay, maybe it goes all the way across, maybe it's just some of it. Okay, just so we get touches of the waves. Maybe they're thicker, maybe they're thinner. Just depends on what you want to achieve. But you also don't want to do this while the blue is wet behind. But if you do it when it's wet, it's just gonna explode like we saw earlier. Again, this is why it would be helpful to do the water first, and then the other things like the grass and flowers and stuff like that, just because it is kind of a background thing. We're going to end up having some issues if we're not careful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do another wave or two, and then I need to jump, or small wave, and then I'm going to jump into my other waves. What I'd like to do is possibly mix some green and get some green going in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a clean brush, hit my yellow, grab a little bit of yellow, and take the yellow right across the blue behind the lines I just made, and see if I can't get any green to come of it. And just have a little bit, maybe I have to hit the blue again real quick and add it to that yellow. There we go. That's what I want. Just want a little bit of that green touched in with the blue. I feel like I need to straighten this one out because I've got this little overflow right there. I want to straighten that I think I'm gonna do to my flowers, I need to lighten it up in an area. So I'm gonna try just water first. If that doesn't do what I want it to do, then I'm probably gonna add a little yellow. And you gotta be careful with yellow though, because I've got blue and red in there. If I add yellow to it, it could just become brown, which is why I'm going to just take water to it first and see if I can dilute the area and lighten it up the way I wanna lighten it up. Kind of extract that color off there. Looks like I'm doing what I want to do. And you've got to know when to be done. All right, so I'm gonna let this dry, and then I'm gonna come back to it with the marker, the Sharpies, and then hopefully finish it up. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to get rid of my watercolor. I'm gonna get my Sharpies out. And again, just a reminder, I've got a ultra fine point and I've got a fine point, okay? So I'm gonna make sure that I start off with the ultra fine just to make sure I like the lines, right? So I'm not completely happy yet with the way the watercolor turned out. You also want to make sure it's dry. Make sure we're dry before we go adding this, otherwise it'll bleed. But I'm going to add the marker. I'm going to see what it looks like. I'm going to learn from my mistakes, because some things in this I know that I don't like, but we'll see what it looks like at the end of this. It's okay to be critical of your work. Just make sure you're not overcritical. Listen to people's critiques, and I'll probably have my class critique mine, just to get another opinion, see what people think, see what people say, and if I make another one, then I'll know how to change what I'm doing. And when you're using Sharpie, you want to make sure that you're going nice and slow. And I can already tell that I'm going to add the fine Sharpie instead of the ultra fine to this point, or to this part, the sun. But I like seeing how it's coming out already, and I can fill in later. All right, so I'm not going to use a ruler. I'm just going to try to follow my line the best I can with the pencil. So don't worry about a ruler, just try to be confident, follow your line, make sure you can see your line. And it looks like this is supposed to be a wavy one. Okay. I can tell you I like the contrast already with the black. Nice and steady. Make sure you keep your hand nice and steady. And if you need to pick it up, pick it up. Just try to be careful you don't make too many mistakes when you do that. I can already see that I need to make this a little thicker because I've got this mistake. Otherwise I go in with more watercolor, which I don't really want to do. You can also see this mistake right here where kind of puddled up. And I can attempt to fix that, but you also have to be careful doing that. You don't change the whole thing, plus you don't want to end up bleeding, you know, you don't want your marker to be bleeding and then have black on the sun as well mixed in. Okay, what I'm going to do is make this line thicker. Try and cover that mistake. I see I've got another mistake right here. I can probably add green to that without a problem, but we'll get to that later. I'm gonna do my tree line now and fill that in. And I'm probably gonna start with the lower line. I can see I've got a mistake right here. I'm gonna probably go through with some of the green and fix that mistake before I add pen to that area, because what I'm gonna do now is just add a little bit of stylized lines. You notice I did go through and I fixed some of the issues that I had around the sun. I fixed my mountain there. I'm gonna go through, finish the waves, and I think I'm gonna be done after I fix that little bit of green issue that I've got going on. All right, and after this dries, this little spot right here, that leaf that I did, I'm gonna put in the black, and then I'll be finished. All right, I think I'm gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna fix this little issue right here with the leaf now that this is dry. And double check my lines real quick. Oh, I need to fix that real fast. So I think I'm gonna fix that and be done. Again, do I have regrets on parts of this? Yes, I do. But it's part of the process. Live and learn. Live and learn. So I'm gonna let this dry, and then I'll take a look at it again, make sure there's nothing else. Actually, I'm gonna fix this little spot too. And I could always just go darker here. With the Sharpie up in this area here, if I wanted to. But I think I'll be okay. Just gonna blend it out here. There we go. Now I'm happy with that. Okay.